Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Need to get your book published? Well, Lucinda Halpern will tell us how to find the right agent for the job. Lucinda, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Now, you've written the perfect book, Get Signed. So you're going to help us find that agent, correct?
That's right.
Now, do authors go out and, I'm using the words carefully, hire a literary agent, or do they ask people like yourself, professional agents, will you represent me? Like we may go out and ask someone at a dance, will you dance with me, as opposed to hiring a lawyer or hiring a doctor or a dentist?
That's a great question. The answer is both. So most commonly, and this is a good way to open, most commonly the pitch is, will you represent me? Sort of like asking someone to prom, like, will you be with me? Do you like me enough? And a lot of this is like a dating game. But in fact, what might be helpful for writers to know is that you are actually hiring an agent who works for you, which means that there's no sort of like pedestal that we're standing on and reason that you should be begging us or feeling desperate for our attention. In fact, we should be pretty excited to talk to new talent because that makes our livelihood.
Now, I guess the one question from a bumpkin like me that hits me right away when I read your book, do you actually have to read every book, or can you tell from the first few, either first chapter or first few pages?
I can tell in a few minutes. For fiction, it's a different equation. Fiction requires that you actually spend some time with the material. And when we get it's called a query letter in the industry. Like a pitch for us is called a query letter, which automatically sounds really antiquated. This is a pretty old-fashioned business, but you get a query letter for fiction and you say, this sounds really interesting. I have to read some of this manuscript. And then you might say, this sounds good, there's some weaknesses, but I need to see if it goes anywhere. And then you might say, I need to see how the ending wraps up to see if it delivers on the promise that I was excited to read. So for fiction, you may end up reading more material. At Lucinda Literary, which is my agency, we specialize more in nonfiction, which means that within just a pitch letter, I can pretty much see if there's going to be potential in this or if there isn't, in terms of what my publishing buyers are going to want.
Now, I'm thinking of a problem right off the bat. You pick up a book, you look at it and said, this is a great book. Only trouble is nobody's going to want to read it. Does that ever happen?
All the time.
Okay.
I would say that's more the rule than the exception. And it's so hard, right? It's so hard to make a new book sing and stand out on a shelf these days when there are more books being published than ever before.
Now, we get people who tell us how to pick the right doctor and the right lawyer, but I don't think we've ever had anyone, and we've been on 35 years, tell us how to pick the right literary agent. When I come to see you, are there certain questions I should or should not ask that maybe either are offensive to you or it shows I'm a complete bumpkin? You don't want to represent me if I'm going to ask questions like that. How do we handle ourselves when we talk to you?
So the great news, Bill, is that I wrote a book called Get Signed. And if you read it, you know how to come in prepared to that first conversation with a literary agent. So it actually has questions that you should ask in your interview. And so you won't come in as a bumpkin who knows nothing. You'll come in as a sophisticated person who we want to be in business with. But in terms of making that decision, much like a doctor or a lawyer, this is about trust and chemistry. Trust predominantly. I often call agents the midwives when you don't yet trust the doctor, the doula when you don't yet trust the doctor. So it's not a strange analogy that you bring up doctors. And of course, like lawyers, we're representing your interests. We're negotiating your contracts. So we are chosen in much the same fashion. You've got to have trust in our business experience and sensibility and our shared vision for what you're trying to do with your book. So just to digress on that a little further, every successful author we've worked with is so kind of amazed when they get that mind-blowing book deal and that figure they never could have imagined that a publisher would pay for their first-time book. But when they come back 2 years after the fact the book's been published, what they say to me is, Lucinda, thank you so much for honoring my vision. Despite all of the obstacles, the authors that we want to work with at Lucinda Literary are visionaries. They've got a plan.
And you have to share their plan, I guess. Otherwise, they're not on board with you.
Otherwise, no one's making money, and no one's unlocked the secrets of success if we're not, if we're not actually making deals together. So, because agents work speculatively, we're not being paid by the hour like the lawyer is. We need to believe in this so much and try so tenaciously to get you a book deal. That it becomes so incredibly important that we share that vision from the start. And we have total confidence in you.
If I come in as a new agent, I'm going to make myself either average or below in terms of a writer. So I come into you, you look at me and say, yeah, maybe there's possibilities. Do you look toward a smaller publishing house for someone like me because we're starting out together, almost like a ball player in the minor leagues? Or do you go right to the biggest one and say, well, let's see if they reject him, and then we'll go down the stepladder till we get to the bottom?
Yeah, great. I mean, so many different strategies exist. I would say, and I recommend the same thing, by the way, for writers when they're looking at agents is, you should shoot for the stars, but you should be prepared to query in rounds. This book, Get Signed, is, it's disguised as a book about creating the perfect pitch, but it's actually about how to think like an agent and use the secrets and the shortcuts that agents use in their day-to-day practice. So this is exactly what we do. And so, to answer your question about the majors, at my firm in particular, we're only taking on clients for whom we think we can deliver major deals with big publishers, right? Which is why, unfortunately, we have to be so selective. And I can talk a little bit about the work we do with new writers, which is separate to our agency business. But we would be taking you on with that thought that a Penguin Random House or Simon Schuster or HarperCollins can be interested in you, and then we'd be trying those majors first.
So I'm going to the major leagues. If you're my agent, you're going to be right up there with Scott Burrows and all the big agents. You're taking me right to the top.
Never a guarantee. Never a guarantee. But for, I would say our track record's pretty good. Our track record's pretty good. And I think that whenever an author gets into business with an agent, they should feel some level, that's often the first milestone. That's often the very first win. Some people will frame their letters that they receive from an agent. I'd love to represent you. It's a very exciting moment for an author. And it can be indicative that the market is going to respond to your work too.
And it's validation. I would think that is exciting because it validates. You've either put in anywhere, I guess, from 6 months to a couple of years on this book. And now someone is saying, yes, it's good. You like it as a professional agent. The publisher likes it and feels it'll sell. And it just validates all your hard work.
I mean, Bill, people spend years, if not a life, writing books, even in their heads. Many people are writing a book their whole lives because they're living a story that they then want to put on the page. A lot of people are writing memoirs. And so this has to be treated with such importance and delicacy. I can't emphasize that enough. It is nothing short of having a baby. And I've had babies, and now I've had this book baby, and I can tell you it's very similar. It's very similar.
I can see in many respects. I mean, you're almost like the mother to a baby, as well as being the tough agent, as well as almost being a babysitter to the author, I would say, because you have to nurse them through probably some difficult times. We hear how many authors were turned down 50 times, and on number 51, they now are putting out movies and books by the dozen, and unimaginably wealthy. Can we get some idea if someone came in and they said to you, and you agree to represent them on that first book? Now, first book, no one knows their name yet. But you feel they're very accomplished and certainly qualify for your representation. What could they expect to make on that?
What can they expect to make in terms of the advance or overall over the course of the book?
I guess the overall on the book, and then what would the advance be?
So you're asking a question that, it's like the $1 million question that every author asks, like, what do you think we could get for this book? And unfortunately, there is just no way to give you that answer if you haven't given me the qualifying details of what's the idea And what does your platform look like? Which we can talk about more, what I mean by that. What is the temperature? What's the landscape for a book like this right now? Has there been a major success that looks a lot like the book that you're pitching? Well, maybe we can be confident in something that's six figures. Just very tough to give you a number on that. I mean, I can say to you that we work with a lot of first-time authors. I would say that's the majority of our list because we're only over a decade old. This is not an agency that's been around for 50 years. So we've worked with a lot of first-time authors, and they have had very lucrative careers, whether it's the book advance, the speaking that comes out of it, the film deal that comes out of it, the foreign rights. There's just so many ways that the book is only the beginning.
And I like hearing that, and I'm sure a lot of our authors out there do. Lucinda, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Lucinda Halpern, Halpern. Her book is Get Signed. And Lucinda, we're going to ask you, is there a website where we can learn more?
Yeah, so there is getsignedbook.com, and you're going to find all sorts of things there, like bonuses you can get when you order the book, our free training for authors, all of the coaching services and courses that we offer for beginner writers, and much more.
And it sounds, obviously, I think our audience already knows, you know your way around, and any tips the young author, writer can get is certainly going to be helpful. So go to that website, find out a little more information. We'll give it to you again later in the show. And if you missed a portion of the show, you can go to nccradio.org. That's nccradio.org. Look for the podcast on Secrets of Success. And, of course, just look for Get Signed with our guest, Lucinda Halpern. Lucinda, do you ever get someone who comes in, and it's probably a tough question, but you look at the book and you go, nope. This stinks. We're not going to do it. And how do you handle something? That would be my book. So I'll be the target client.
That's so funny. I'm sure that's not the case, Bill.
Do you just throw me out, or do you say, I'll get back to you in a few years?
Well, again, as agents, we don't have to get back to people we are not interested in, right? Because my agency alone is getting 50 submissions a day. So you can imagine that a bigger agency is getting hundreds. So we have very clear rules on our websites as agents that say, don't be in touch with us. We will be in touch with you if we're interested. So it doesn't happen to me often. If you mean that I am working already representing and working with a client who's written something that I think is terrible, and how do I deal with that situation? I would quite honestly say we're not going to get to that point because I'm too involved with the author at every step of the way. So when he's coming up with bad ideas or bad directions, I'm telling him very gently why they don't work. And we're working in partnership to create the best product. So never would it happen that an author, who I represent, suddenly hands me a manuscript and says, let's go publish this. I would have been involved in creating it with that person.
From the time someone comes to you, is this a 30-day process, a 2-year process? I have no knowledge of the literary world. The process, and we actually have a pretty cool chart, it's in the book too, I hope, of what the timeline actually looks like. And it's pretty phenomenal because it takes a long time to get a book on shelves. So for the nonfiction world, different from fiction, the nonfiction world, you are selling a proposal, not an entire manuscript, but a 50-page document that's much more like a marketing document as to why this book actually deserves a place in a very crowded market and who you are to write it and why this book now. You create that proposal, you send it to a publisher, and then, you send it to agents, and then that agent is working with you on it to develop it further. That could take something like 3 months minimally. Even if you've come to us with a fully developed proposal, we're going to have feedback for you. We're going to edit. We're going to develop it together. Then we're going to go take it to a publisher. Best case scenario, you're selling that book within a month. That's the kind of timeline that we see and that we strive for because we have relationships that kind of are used to reading overnight, responding quickly to our pitches. They're trusting agents to be their gatekeepers, right? They're trusting our taste. Then they buy the book, hopefully. This will shock authors. It seems to shock everyone I work with. Now, after we've sold your book, it's going to take another 4 weeks to get a contract, and it's going to take another 4 weeks after that to negotiate it and get paid. People are like,
we did this deal months ago. What do you mean I'm not getting paid yet? Right? Even more than that, you're getting paid in thirds, in quarters, sometimes a little more or less. You're not getting that entire chunk of, say, $100,000 up front. You're getting it paid over these different milestones that could be 3 to 4 years' time. So again, bear with me on this process where I can go through it again. 3 to 4 months to develop the proposal with the agent. Minimally, sometimes it happens in 2 weeks, sometimes it happens in 1 week, but say a month to actually sell the thing. Minimally 6 months to a year to write it. Another year to produce the thing, and then you're on shelves. So that usually ends up being about 3 years.
I'm hearing don't quit my day job. Is that what you're telling me?
Don't quit your day job. I mean, Get Signed is the perfect. I learned so much writing this book that my compassion and my depth of understanding for authors is now at such a different level, for which I'm so grateful. I thought I was going to self-publish this book. I started writing it one summer and thought I finished the whole thing. Then I got this wacky book deal I didn't expect. A publisher that I do business with said, you know what, we want to commission that book. And I'm like, all right, well, I was going to self-publish it, but if you're going to give me a deal to do it and now it's serious, I'm going to bring in a collaborator, an outside editor to actually help me. Then we spend another year or 8 months writing the thing. So this has been since 2021 that I've been working on this book, and it just came out in February of 2024.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of interest. Now, one of the things as I was going through your book, I was thinking, and of course with experience on the show, because we interview 98% of our people are authors, do you ever read a book and say, this is a really good book, but the title stinks or it's misleading? I won't be rude and say it stinks, but it either takes them in the wrong direction or it conveys the wrong message. Do you help out with that? Is that part of your job?
I would say 90% of the time we need to work the title around. I also say, if this is encouraging to writers, that if you've got a great title, you've probably won half the battle, because everyone is in this kind of instant attention mindset, right? Or instant evaluation. Let's have a snapshot within a second. A reader makes a buying decision or scrolls an Instagram post within a second. So if there's a really compelling title, you've done half the work for them. Most often, as you said, they come in with kind of a B- title, or it just doesn't relate to what they're trying to do. It isn't clear enough. It isn't in the right genre of what they're trying to do. So yes, absolutely. Agents help them with that big picture packaging and thinking. I love a title challenge.
Because so often we have a guest on the show, and they'll even make a comment. I'll say, "Oh, that would be a great title of a book." If I see that in the bookstore, I would, and it's only, of course, 3 or 4 or 5 words. I would have to stop and pick up that book just to know what it's about. And another guest we had on, I think, had angels or flowers on the cover, and I said, to me, this looked, if I was in the bookstore, it looked like a romantic novel. It didn't look like anything like what the book was actually about, which was nonfiction and business, et cetera, et cetera. So,
but think about your podcast, not different. Secrets of Success. I mean, that's something everyone wants. So when you think about naming a podcast, it's very similar to a book, and many books are just a ripoff of the podcast title, because that's the brand that you've established.
Are there secret words in the title? Now, I only found out after I named the show years ago, Secrets of Success, but apparently I think I read that that's 2 of the 7 words that are the most valued by someone, I don't know what they would call it, the listeners, that if they hear secrets and success, that draws people in. Are there key words that you advise an author to use that will catch our imagination?
Yeah. I mean, again, you got to talk about what the genre is, right? But in the nonfiction space, secrets, success, $1 million, numbers around anything, right? You see all these productivity books or 7 self-help, 7 ways to do X, 7 seems the magic number. In the fiction space, there was a long time where any title with the word wife in it seemed to just fly off the shelves, like the Paris wife, the ex-wife, the this. And I like paying attention to trends like this. They're not statistically researched, but you can look at a New York Times bestseller list and say, wow, I see a lot of recurring words, and pay attention to that as writers, and here's something I also advise in Get Signed. It's like, look across mediums. People are not just consuming content in books, if anything, that's the last place they're consuming content. They're listening to podcasts, scrolling social media, they're watching a Netflix series. You want to use that language, those plot lines, those tropes, those, elements that are working, and apply them to your book.
I'm learning so much. I should be taking even more notes, but I'm listening to you and enjoying it. Lucinda, once again, before we go further, I'd like our audience to know you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. The person you're listening to today is Lucinda Halpern, Halpern. Her book is Get Signed. She's telling you how to get your book published, get out there. And Lucinda, would you give us that website once again?
Yes, it's getsignedbook.com.
And I think all the tips that you're giving us, when someone comes in to you to have you represent them, what are the tips you give them? What would you say to someone if I'm sitting there and just let's count me as a neutral. You don't know if my book is good or bad, but what are some of the things that a member of our audience should do to not fall into the mistake category or get you irritated? Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, we don't get irritated easily. I'll say one thing that people do that's irritating would be to send a note to about 50 agents and put them all on one email and say, I'm the most fabulous new novelist since J.K. Rowling, and here's my novel. I mean, that is irritating, right? When you put lots of people on one note. But in terms of common mistakes, there are many. They're detailed in the book. I think that it's almost more constructive to think about what are the chords that you need to hit. So you need to tell us why this book now. What is new and different about this book? What is timely and timeless about this book, right? Because, do you want your book to just ride a trend for 1 second and then be a flash in the pan success and die on the vine? No, you don't want that. But publishers want a book that's going to sell for about 5 years' time or more. So there have to be those universal timeless themes that you've seen before, again, in music and literature and film, wherever you're consuming your content. For nonfiction, a lot depends on your authority to write the book in the first place. So if you're writing a memoir, as I say in the book, your lived experience is your expertise. Maybe you need nothing more than that. However, memoir is one of the most competitive categories to break into. It's dominated by celebrities, and if not celebrities, then Instagram celebrities or very high-profile writers who are well-known enough that they can take they essentially have the audience existing to write that memoir. Otherwise, if you're writing a self-help book, the first question on a reader's mind is going to be, how can I trust this person? What's his expertise? What's his authority? And this book Get Signed is about how to kind of fake it till you make it a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly how I became successful in my career, a lot of faking it till I made it. And I think you've got to try on that authority, that expert, that future self that you're going to be as an author, because that's what agents and publishers are looking for.
Now, what kind of changes, if any, do you also become, in quote, kind of an editor? Like if I brought a book into you and say, Bill, it seems like it might be pretty good, but, and in fairness, there's a lot of things you pick up, either it's my writing style or poor punctuation or something like that. Would you give me tips and say, take it back and come back in about 2 months and make these changes?
Yeah. Again, I'm not reading a full manuscript of someone that, like a full manuscript that I'm not going to take on is very unlikely to happen. But if I read a book proposal and I think you really got something here, Bill, I like the idea, I like the writing, go out there and develop more of a following around your work and come back to me. That's probably the most common reason for rejection or revision that we're giving to authors. If not, it could be editorial. It could be, I have some editorial feedback for you. I really love your novel, but go forth and see if these edits resonate with you. And if they do, feel free to come on back and return. And we have signed many writers who do exactly that. They're just very dogged about wanting to see their book published, and they go out and they implement the feedback.
Now, you mentioned before something called a query letter. Could you tell us what that is? And do you send that to me or do I send that to you?
So what happens there is you prepare it and you send it to me as a writer. And again, Get Signed. My book is all about how to create one effectively. Of course, if you write a great book, then the query letter writes itself. That's sort of the secret of this book as well. It's more about writing a great book than writing a great letter. But all of those elements apply. So anyway, pitch is 300 words, give or take. We're not going to fault you if you're at 301 or if you're at 289, doesn't really matter. You're aiming for a short, concise letter that tells us what your book is about, who is going to read it, why this book now, and if you're writing a nonfiction, why you have the authority to write it. So it's a pitch. It's a pitch letter. And these days, it's an email. It used to be sending your whole manuscript and your letter to an agent's office. And you might think that that was better because, or that it's better now via email, but you're wrong because now so many emails, you may get caught in someone's spam filter. Back then, at least it landed on someone's desk. They had to open it. They had to peek at a first page, and maybe that first page hooked them.
Now, should I keep sending, if you don't respond to me, let's say within 30 days, maybe it did go into the wrong, the spam file, etc. Should I send another one? Is that okay to send it, say, in case you didn't see my first one?
So thank you for asking, because that's one of the most revelatory things I teach and Get Signed. It's not just, yes, you need to follow up to be taken seriously. It's also, how do you follow up strategically? How and when and to whom and how, what do you say in your follow up? There are a lot of tricks. Ultimately I will say that you do want to follow up, but you want to find a meaningful way to do it.
Now, Lucinda, once you and I, we agree I have a great book, you want to represent me. Now, do I need the family lawyer to negotiate the contract, or is that something that comes under your umbrella?
So there's an agency contract because you're going to need one just to work together to make sure that we are on the same page. And if we secure this deal for you, we are going to be commissioning this in perpetuity. So there's the agency contract, and sure, you might have the family lawyer look at an agency contract. Once the publishing agreement arrives, an agent should be very versed in contracts and able to negotiate for you. Am I ever going to advise that an author doesn't also have an outside attorney look? Of course I would advise that, because the more eyes on something, the better. It's too important.
I think we've learned a lot. I think you're going to make us all a lot of money, and I'm going to go out and start my book right after the show. And I'll be sending it to you in the query letter in about 3 weeks, so you'll have everything there. For our listeners, I want to thank you so much today. The book is Get Signed. It's by our guest, Lucinda Halpern, Halpern. Thinking of writing a book? Read this book first. Get all the ground rules. Lucinda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate it.
I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.